Newport Harbor, a renowned center for recreational boating and swimming activities, business and fashion. A residential community which includes some of the finest real estate in the world. The city of Newport Beach, which began in 1889 as a wharfside community on the Newport-Balboa Peninsula, has grown from its water-oriented areas onto the inland hills and mesa. Newport Harbor has become one of the most prestigious and desirable locations in the world. But the progression of this diverse community is the result of its visionary early residents and city fathers. This marker, located at the base of the West Jetty, is dedicated to civic leader George A. Rogers for his efforts in spearheading the final development of the harbor as we know it. Today, thousands of pleasure boats flow freely in and out of Newport Harbor, but the harbor has not always been this safe and serene. There were many dangers and problems to overcome. Examining Newport Harbor's 100-year history will reveal these and other important issues. This U.S. Coast Guard survey map, drawn in 1875, shows the peninsula, the islands, and the marshlands. The harbor was created by the Santa Ana River, passing through the upper bay, which gradually changed its course, so that by the 1770s it had established a channel coming into Newport Bay from West Newport, seen here on the left. Floodwaters then built up the peninsula and its beaches. Captain Samuel Sumner Dunnels, a San Diego port pilot, brought the first cargo of lumber through the treacherous harbor entrance on September 10, 1870. Captain Dunnels' vessel, the Vaquero, was a flat-bottomed river sternwheeler. The cargo of wood shingles and lumber was exchanged for hay and grain. Dunnels safely piloted his steam-powered craft through the entrance, dodging sandbars, and landed just below the cliffs at the present location of Dover Drive and the Pacific Coast Highway Bridge. An employee of the landowners, Irvine Flint and Company, suggested the name, New Port, to replace the distasteful name of San Joaquin Slough. A warehouse and chute were built on this site called Newport Landing. Sacks of grain were sent down a hinged chute directly into the hold of the vessel and anchor. The shifting sandbars in the harbor entrance limited shipping. Many ships went aground, claiming many lives. The McFadden brothers, who operated Newport Landing, decided to close down the bay wharf in 1887. The next year, the McFadden Ocean Wharf was built at the present site of the Newport Pier. All sizes of cargo ships could land at McFadden's Wharf. The wharf was a quarter of a mile long and 19 feet above the water at high tide. To transport cargo, the McFadden brothers built their own railroad from Newport to Santa Ana. This is the railroad station located on the wharf. It was in this rail station in 1906 that the city's Board of Trustees met for the first time, and the city was incorporated. Railroads rapidly replaced sailing vessels for carrying freight. The Pacific Electric Railroad made its way into Newport in 1905 and Balboa in 1906. The red car sped its way from Los Angeles to Newport in about an hour. But residential lifestyles were hampered by storm waves and high tides that continually plagued the peninsula. Flooding was a common inconvenience. The tall man is Bennett Ray, who served as a city lamplighter in 1909. At 7 feet 2 inches, he didn't need a ladder to do his job. He is standing at D Street and Central, which is now known as Balboa Boulevard. This is the view from Rocky Point, Corona del Mar in 1914. Few homes were built on the end of the peninsula because of the frequent flooding. Increased drownings and 2 massive floods that cluttered the bay with debris spurred the harbor boosters to improve the entrance. In 1916, the city of Newport Beach voted $125,000 to build the West Jetty. 3 years later, Newport Beach had a community barbecue to celebrate Orange County's decision to provide $500,000 to extend the West Jetty and build the Bitter Point Dam to divert the Santa Ana River Channel from the West Newport Bay into a straight line to the ocean. Maneuvering through the bay proved dangerous for some. This is the Fremont, a masted barkentine with square rigger sails. It ran aground in the jetty channel on October 14, 1919. The Fremont had been refinished for the filming of the original Treasure Island. This is what was left of the Fremont in 1920 after it was dynamited to clear the wreck as a navigational hazard. This view from Corona del Mar shows the massive sandbars at the entrance. These are some of the large sandbars below Corona del Mar. On August 1, 1925, the Muriel ran aground on a sandbar blocking the channel. Vessels going aground in the harbor entrance further complicated passage into the already narrow inlet. The Muriel remained a hazard for the next 5 years. The Chamber of Commerce, with its manager Harry Welch, worked 3 years to obtain bond funds from Orange County for harbor improvements. Their efforts proved fruitless. The city of Newport Beach decided to fund it alone and voted $500,000 in February of 1927 to build the East Jetty and an extension of the existing West Jetty. The rebuilt West Jetty ended up looking like this in 1927 after the joint efforts of the city and the county. Pilot boats had to be used to map the changing entrance channel. Pilot boats here are practicing in the surf at the jetty. Storm waves and high tides were constantly flooding the peninsula. The oceanfront beaches needed to be widened to prevent continual flooding. This film clip shows the building of the West Jetty's groin. The pile driver is placing piles to hold the rails in place. Rock-loaded railroad cars would then be moved out onto the jetty, and a crane would move the rocks into place. Reverend W.H. Stockton, who shot this film, reported that as soon as the film ran out, the pile driver fell into the ocean. Railroad cars carried rock for making the groin. The rock used for building the groin was brought by railroad and boat from quarries on Catalina Island and from Riverside. Sand was dredged from the entrance of the harbor through pipes and then deposited on the Peninsula Beach in 1927. The widened beaches act as a buffer to protect the peninsula from storm flooding. The East Jetty is the first ocean jetty to be constructed of cement panels sunk into the sand. The cement panels were formed by pouring concrete into wooden forms on the main beach of Corona del Mar. Workmen would roll the concrete panels out to the end of the East Jetty and sink them into the sand with water pressure hoses. This is the same method used today in the construction of seawalls on bayfront lots. In this piece of film footage, we can see the small dredger removing the sandbars from the harbor entrance. An early harbor development booster and harbor master, Joseph A. Beek, can be seen feeling the sand in the water from the dredger. The citizens of Newport Beach voted an additional $200,000 to complete the dredging in 1928. But high tides, flooding, and sandbars did not discourage the spirit of Newport Beach. Within the bay, yachtsmen enjoyed bay sailing. And here we see the Balboa Ferry busy carrying passengers. The city campground at 15th Street is filled with vacationers for the busy Memorial Day weekend in 1927. The beach was as popular in 1927 as it is today. The Memorial Day Parade on the Newport Beach Pier, 1927. The Newport Harbor Yacht Club, formed in 1917, was the first yacht club in the harbor, with Dr. Albert Soyland as its first Commodore. Boats are being decorated for the 1927 Tournament of Lights parade started in 1908 by an Italian gondolier, John Scarpa. In May 1930, repairs needed to be made to the West Jetty. The funds obtained from the 1927 Newport Beach bond issue were not enough to extend the jetties to the proper length. The Peninsula Beach was being undercut and the entrance channel was filling up with sandbars. The first step was to dredge the bay. The Los Angeles is shown working on the inlet on May 20th, 1930. The cement east jetty is on the left horizon. The dredger Los Angeles is dredging sand from the entrance and running sand and water through pipes over the west jetty and onto the peninsula beach. These are views of Newport in the early 1930s. The water in Lido Isle Channel was a prime location for water sports such as aquaplaning, which was considered a daredevil sport before water skis were developed. This photo shows storm flooding on the peninsula. It was taken at 15th Street and Balboa Boulevard on December 8, 1934. Rendezvous Ballroom, the home of the big bands of the 1930s and 40s, is shown with storm flooding in 1934. Harbor booster George A. Rogers, whose son had drowned in the harbor entrance in 1926, and city engineer Richard Patterson went to Washington in the middle of the Depression to obtain federal funds to develop the harbor and dredge the bay. 1933 Orange County Harbor bond issue passed, providing the funds to complete the harbor. Boosters here are celebrating the start of harbor dredging in 1935 aboard the John McMullen. A dredger working in the bay with the Caltech Oceanography Laboratory in the background. Dredged sand was deposited on the peninsula beach at I Street. Protective beaches were widened 200 to 300 feet. This 1935 picture shows the start of construction of the East Jetty by barge and crane. Notice how the rock jetty was started at the end and worked back to the cement jetty. At last, the jetties were completed and the dredging of the bay finished. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt started the celebration by sending a signal from the telegraph key on his White House desk to the Coast Guard cutter Hermes. The Hermes then fired its cannon to signal the beginning of the impressive yacht parade celebrating the harbor completion on May 23, 1936. The lead boat of the parade was the Memory, skippered by her owner George A. Rogers, honorary captain of the port. The boat parade toured the bay and arrived at the Newport Harbor Yacht Club for a celebration party. The parade grounds for Newport Beach are on the bay, and the annual parades vary from character boat parades to Christmas boat parades. A parade of boats welcomed John Wayne on his return from the hospital to his waterfront Bay Shores home. This is the celebration of Bill Ficker's successful defense of America's Cup in 1970. Bill Ficker is a talented sailor who learned to sail on Newport Bay. The character boat parade features one-of-a-kind boats. The annual Christmas boat parade is the present-day version of the Tournament of Lights, which began in 1908. A flyover with the Newport Beach helicopter shows the present-day harbor entrance, a safe and protected bay. Today, Newport Bay is the premier pleasure boat harbor on the West Coast. The development of the harbor has made Newport Beach one of the most prestigious and desirable residential and commercial cities in the world.